Can you hear me? Okay, I think we get started. Musical chairs.
They offered a higher price.
Okay, Ron, all right, let's take it out.
I thought he said it was free.
So thank you so much for coming out for this today, and I want to thank everyone who came into the library and said, hey, can you get Phil Caputo to do a talk? And it didn't take any encouragement, but when I approached Phil about that, he looked at me with a puzzled look and he said, why? I said, Phil, people want to hear you. Hear me do what? He was not helpful. I said, we want to hear about you. You live here. You're our friend, our neighbor. We want to know about you. We want to know about your life, how you did what you did, how you got where you got, how you survived a lot of major obstacles. And he said, well, I'll think about it. That's not the answer I wanted. And so I thought, okay, back off, give him time, I'll give him a day. And I think he finally agreed to do it just because he was sick and tired of being running him. But I was thinking about this later, and I thought, you know, we're all kind of stressed out. It's a rough time in the world. And we need to hear from each other. We need to hear our stories and how we survived and how we persevered and how we got through. And we're curious people. And Phil has done so much in his life, met so many amazing people. And we kind of want to hear about that too, like, Jim Harrison? I've heard stories about you and Jim, and I don't know if they're true, but they were great stories. I even heard that you two almost got arrested, but we won't go there. And so, 2 years ago, Phil spoke here at the library, and he said he wanted to do his talk in the reading room. And we said, sure, that's fine. Well, then the day came, and I realized that if even half the people who said they were going to come came, there was no way we could fit him in there. So Kayla and I came tearing in here and started putting up chairs, and I left and to try to intercept Phil, and he was already coming in the library. And we walked back to the reading room, and we just stood there, staring at that vacant room. And I walked up to him, and he turned and he said, I was kind of hoping to get 3 or 4. And I said, come on, and I brought him into this. And I'll say to you now what I said to you then. This is for you, Phil. This is for you. Thank you.
All right, let me know how you can hear me. All right? Okay, good. I want to thank all of you for coming and for the old library staff for allowing me to spout off about myself, my favorite subject. And as Jay pointed out, I spoke here 2 years ago and was gratified as well as amazed by the number of people that show up in a small town like this, which, by the way, is my favorite town in the whole world. Wonderful little place. Anyway, they had asked me which is sort of a big subject, I guess. And I've tried to confine it to a couple of incidents that taught me a few things. Many years ago, it was 60 in fact, I saw a report written by our intelligence officer in Vietnam. Under the headline, Enemy Situation, it displayed various symbols pinpointing the scattered location of Viet Cong battalions. In the margins, the officer had scrawled, "Interesting, but what does it all mean?" Well, looking back on my own life, I have the same question. And this little talk will be an attempt to answer it. When you reach an advanced age, I will turn 84 in 3 months, it's natural to wonder if your sojourn on this planet has meant anything, even if its significance is confined to your own family. That impulse becomes more compelling if your life has been, as mine has, full of experiences that have been wonderful as well as horrifying, terrifying as well as enlightening. From around the age of 10 until the recent past, I was intellectually and physically restless, always wondering what lay over the next hill or around the next bend in the road or river. I grew up mostly in a western suburb of Chicago that at the time, the 1950s, was more rural than suburban. But to me, it was stifling and dark, and I longed to escape. Once with a friend, I hopped an outbound freight on the Illinois Central Line, intending to ride it to wherever it went. Well, we lost our nerve before the train had gone a quarter of a mile. And hopped off. We were fading hobos. But the compulsion to be out there rather than in here remained and grew stronger. At one point in my early life, my ambition was to become an astronaut and flee the Earth altogether. I never did climb into a NASA rocket and throw off the chains of gravity. Instead, I eventually became a news reporter and foreign correspondent, a profession that offered to satisfy my appetite for red-blooded adventure, dramatic experiences, excitement. I joined the staff at the Chicago Tribune after serving 3 years with the U.S. Marines, including 16 months in Vietnam. I will leave that subject for another day. As Eric Maria Remarque wrote in All Quiet on the Western Front, war is not an adventure for those who have to fight in it. If you're curious, I urge you to read my memoir. It's over there, A Rumor of War. But for now, suffice it to say that I learned a lot about myself in Vietnam. Some of it flattering, some anything but. In my capacity as a correspondent, I covered stories in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, with a return journey to Vietnam to report on the fall of Saigon to the North Vietnamese. I covered 5 other conflicts, was captured and held prisoner by Palestinian guerrillas in Lebanon, and was wounded during its civil war. I've survived bouts of malaria and several other tropical diseases, crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains with Afghan rebels, trekked the Sinai and Eritrean deserts on foot in camelback, and spent 3 months exploring the Australian outback. Altogether, I've been to or through 58 countries on 5 continents, from Algeria to Uzbekistan. And those are just the highlights. The Stoic philosophy, of which I am a student, teaches that we should not ask why something happened and start asking, what has it taught us? Which brings me back to that question, what does it all mean? Looking back on so many varied experiences, it's hard to choose which were the most meaningful, at least to me. But 3 keep coming back to me, so I will choose them. We're going to do some time travel back to 1969. Chicago, in those days of Mayor Richard J. Daley, was a newsman's paradise. Big, raw, rough, city that made New Jersey seem like Switzerland. I was a cub reporter in the city room, a cavernous and noisy place filled with cigarette smoke, telex machines hammering, typewriters clattering, editors bellowing, "Boy, copy!" There were no copy girls then. I heard the voice of the night city editor, Don Agrella, yell, "CAPUTO! Hat and coat!" Agrella was an old-timer from the days of reporters when all males wore hats. And hat and coat meant I had an assignment. Well, pretty soon I found myself on the 18th floor of the Palmer House Hotel, the Waldorf of Chicago. 2 young Japanese women had been murdered there. They'd been staying there with a group of Japanese students. A crowd of newsmen and photographers filled the hall by the elevators. The corridor leading to the girls' room was blocked by 4 cops who looked like the starting line for the Chicago Bears. A police spokesman stood in front of them, throwing up an informational smokescreen as impenetrable as the meat and muscle behind them. 2 foreign students murdered in the prestigious Palmer House. A huge embarrassment for Mayor Daley, and a tragedy, but a reporter's red meat. I called Agrella from the phone bank, no cell phones back then, and told him that I couldn't get a thing. No one could. He said, "You gotta get something. Get a description of the room." I mentioned the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse blockading the corridor. Agrella reminded me that hotels had fire escapes, and fire escapes had catwalks. Now, I am terrified of heights. I was eager to prove myself, to show that I was capable of running with the big dogs. Plenty of those in Chicago in those times, with 4 major daily newspapers, any number of local papers, and a host of radio stations. I fought my fear, went up a short flight of stairs, and opened the fire escape door. And find myself sidling along a catwalk 200 feet above the pavement. I peeked into each room like some kind of high-wire pervert. Eventually, I came to the right room, and the drapes were open, and I saw everything. The bodies, the blood, evidence text, dusting for fingerprints, taking photographs. I even noted irrelevant details, like the pattern in the wallpaper. I slithered back to the fire escape door, went down the short staircase to the phones, and I called rerun. I then noticed a 6'3" guy from the Chicago Daily News trying to listen in as I phoned in the story. I caught the phone with my hand and lowered my voice, but he heard enough to figure out what I had done. I saw him go out to the fire escape. Damn! I was going to lose my exclusive. Then I remembered the main rule of Chicago journalism. Do whatever you need, do anything to get the story before everyone else. The door was my own. It had a big brass handle spread across it. To open the door, you pull up on the handle, you lock it, and push it out. I pushed out. 5 minutes later, I heard a frantic banging at the door and a voice screaming, "Let me in!" But I just stood there, knowing that in a few minutes, my competition would be past his deadline. I waited those few minutes, unlocked the door, and then hid myself in a crowd of newsmen. Don't forget this guy was 6'3" and 5'6". The guy from the Daily News called in his story. though it was too late for his early editions. He spotted me, came over, and questioned the legitimacy of my ancestry. I pretended not to know why he was so upset. I returned to the sitting room, welcomed by Don Agrella's pat on the back and his hearty attaboys. I had proved that I could run with big dogs. This story is connected to the next two, although it might not seem that way. A few years later, I not only could run with the big dogs, I was a big dog. I became a foreign correspondent assigned to the Chicago Tribune's Middle East Bureau in Beirut, Lebanon. I soon found myself covering the Lebanese Civil War, by far the worst conflict I've ever seen. Muslims versus Christians, factions fighting factions, each side convinced that God or Allah was on its side. I didn't know it then, but something had happened to me, witnessing so much senseless carnage. My heart had become encased in a kind of emotional flakjack. I could look upon the most horrifying and heartbreaking sights and not feel much of anything. I still remember the day during a lull in the fighting, when 13 Muslim women lined up in front of a bakery to buy bread for their families. A Christian spotter saw them, and he radioed for mortar fire, and it killed them all. The emotional flak jacket did its work. I dismissed their deaths as routine, did not file a word about the incident. Hundreds were dying every week. 13 more was no big deal. Well, not long afterward, I received a message from my foreign desk. Newsweek magazine had an exclusive interview with a Palestinian commander named Abu Rashid. I was tasked with getting my own interview. My reaction was that the foreign editor had lost his mind. The PLO camps were easily the most dangerous places in that very dangerous country. It would be suicide to go into them. When we foreign correspondents cooperated with each other, the hyper-competitive world of Chicago journalism was behind me. I went to Newsweek's bureau office, manned by Nick Prophet and Barry King, and asked them how I might get an interview with this Abu Rashid. They looked at me, and then at each other. And then Nick leaned back in his chair and he said, "Oh, go ahead." My confusion was obvious. Barry cleared it up, saying, "Nick is Abu Rashid." It turned out that they also had been harassed by the foreign editor to interview the PLO commander, and Nick had replied, "Why not ask us to swallow cyanide?" But the editor insisted, so to satisfy his demand and save their own necks, they invented Abu Rashid. I took out my notepad and pen and conducted the interview. Nick had mastered the PLO's jargon perfectly. And in short order, other correspondents did as I had, and the fictitious Mr. Rashid became the most celebrated commander in the world. Now this was the most mortal of mortal sins in journalism. We had committed it because no story was worth life. Still, I felt ashamed of myself for my part in the ruse. And that shame played its role in what happened to me 4 months later. Muslim militias had attempted to take control of Christian neighborhoods. The static war of the previous months, excuse me a second, I have allergies. The static warfare of the previous months had intensified into a war of movement, or attempted movement. Another telex from the desk arrived. I was to go out and cover this new phase of the war. Another suicide mission. But deciding to play it straight this time, I saluted, left my family in our apartment, and drove to the Reuters news agency, in hopes of gathering secondhand scraps to cobble a story together. Again, I would go out, actually I would go out on the street to get shot. Well, no such luck. The fighting had grown so fierce in that area that the entire Reuters office had abandoned the building. There were no scraps to be had. As I was returning to my car, a squad of Muslim militia stopped me and asked who I was and what I was doing there. Sahafi America, I replied in Arabic, meaning American journalist. They asked to see my ID. I took out the laminated press card issued by the Ministry of Information. This piece of paper could save your life. So when one of the militiamen grabbed it and began to cut it into with a straight razor, I reacted instinctively, seizing his wrist to stop him. Half expecting the guy to turn the razor in my throat, I was surprised when instead he gave the card back to me. I see a child here, so I have to clean this up. Screw President Ford, he snarled in accented English. I paused for a beat, considered a statement, and replied, right, screw him, and walked on. I had gone half a block or so when I heard a rapid semi-automatic fire behind me. Turning, I saw two gunmen sprinting toward me, wildly shooting their AK-47s. I ran like hell, zigzagging as in the war movie. But this was no Hollywood make-believe. Pieces of concrete smacked into my head, bullet fragments tore into my right foot, and then a full round smashed into my left ankle and dropped me. By purest good luck, I fell onto a Christian-held street. My assailants ran off, afraid they would be shot if they pursued me any further. Two more pieces of good luck followed. I managed to crawl into the courtyard of the building to a vascular surgeon room. He came outside and patched me up as best he could. Then summoned a Lebanese armored personnel commander that brought me to his hospital. Now it was time for some more bad luck. The hospital was in the middle of the war zone, with every room and some corridors filled with casualties. Consequently, it had run out of anesthesia. No problem, said the doctor. I had lost so much blood that if he put me under, I was likely to stay there. I was stretched out on an operating table. Two burly men held me down and jabbed a hard lower bar between my teeth to prevent me from biting my tongue in half while the doctor extracted the bullet from my ankle and the fragments from my right foot. The pain was like nothing I had ever felt before, and I'll add or since. It was as if my lower limbs were being dipped in boiling oil. Well, to abbreviate, I spent the next year in a wheelchair or on crutches and finally graduated to a cane. My family and I had been evacuated back to the U.S., and I soon found myself back in my parents' house in the same suburb I had been so desperate as to escape when I was a boy. I mentioned earlier that we should avoid asking why something happened, ask instead what we should make of it. Nevertheless, I sent that question, why wasn't I shot? Why should I feel all this pain? And I sent it toward heaven, but received no reply. And And in time, I realized that it was up to me to supply the answer. I came to a recognition. I had not been wounded by some deliberate act of God or fate. I had been shot and crippled for no reason whatever. But the why of it was not important. Wasn't even relevant. What was important and relevant would be that what I made of it. And I could cry, feel sorry for myself. I could take to drinking and pain-killing drugs. Or I could turn my personal disaster into an opportunity to achieve something significant and lasting. It so happened that a gift had been presented to me while I recovered. A contract from Henry Holt Publishers to write A Rumor of War, my first book. I've been working on it for a long time, whenever I had a spare moment. And those were few. Now I had nothing but spare moments. So I gritted my teeth, determined to finish the book, and I did, in 9 months. It was published to great acclaim, but cheers and applause, while welcome, were not the reward. The reward was a lesson. I was a better man than I had thought, for in all of us is the power to suffer the worst and overcome it, to rest from loss, from injury and anguish. The best is in us. Yet there was more on a deeper, less personal level. I thought back to those 13 Muslim women who had been slaughtered while trying to buy bread for their families. I recalled how I had callously dismissed them as collateral damage, and saw myself as a man who had violated the rule, the requirement that we must share in each other's suffering. I concluded that I had been wounded, so I would learn what suffering really meant, and I had been taught that, so I would know compassion once again. That's it. So, how comes that dreadful moment when I ask a question? And I look out and see all right.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
you find yourself in bed or convalescing, and at one point you decide, well, here's this opportunity to write this memoir on your Vietnam experience. And as a writer, though, could you just kind of talk to us about, how, okay, that sounds like a great idea. How do you start or organize those experiences? How does the writing process come out of that moment of inspiration?
Well, did everybody hear that? I had started the book long before that,
Oh, okay.
but with the life I was leading and the pressures on a correspondent and on a reporter were such that if I got a chance to work on it for more than a day, a month, I considered myself lucky. So I had really gotten nowhere. But I knew what I wanted to say and how to say it. I just didn't have the time. And this rather awful thing that happened to me, turns out, gave the time. And like I said, after years of these pathetic attempts that I had put in 9 months.